Looks like Joe has a mic and Landry has a mic. Okay, that's my mic, guys. Let's go ahead and get started with a prayer. And Joe, if you don't mind leading us in prayer real quick.
Gracious Father, so thankful this morning that you have given us health and given us the ability to be here. Help us as we open your word, Father. Help us to be amazed at the things that you do for us, and help us to understand your great love and your great plan for us. Help us to specifically this morning understand the message from Revelation, that you're victorious and that your people are victorious, and help us always to understand that even when things around us look like things are not going well, you're still victorious, Father, at the end. Help us to have this trust and faith in you every day of our lives. In Jesus we pray. Amen.
All right, I'm going to give you all just a quick update. You may notice my kids are wearing masks this morning, and I probably will in between. Duane is going to get tested today, where I have no symptoms, but in her classroom this week there were 6 active cases out of 22 kids. And on Thursday and Friday she had 7 students total, which is interesting. I will go ahead and warn you as well that Duane had surgery scheduled on Friday, so positive test would mess all that up. So there's a lot riding here. So just we won't take it personally if you think we have the plague this morning. We have no symptoms. We are vaccinated. That's a personal choice. So, and we survived being around a lot of people when Megan Junkin and some others got COVID. So far, we've been protected, and we feel pretty good. Complicates that with Duane is she has severe allergies, as her doctor sitting in the audience can tell you, and it's ragweed season. So ragweed is extremely hot right now, then she's extremely allergic, so what is it? So there you go. Fun times at the Francis house. Speaking of plagues, let's get into Revelation. As so many have interpreted it that way. We'll begin with our 4 essentials. By the way, to add to that, I think most of us got the email. Flynn Gerald has tested positive, and so that explains a lot of their absences as well. Just along those lines, let's just be praying. I got a message of a preacher in North Carolina that his brother-in-law passed away this morning. So things are still, not still, but they're bad. So let's go to our 4 essentials. We'll get off of that and talk about, I'd like to say happy stuff, but not necessarily since we're in Revelation. The first essential, Revelation is what has what? I'm going to have to speak up this morning. Special style, and that style is what? Apocalyptic. It is apocalyptic. It is a narrative told to people in a crisis using signs and symbols designed specifically to give them hope. And that plays an important part when you try to interpret what is going on in this book. And that's one of the things we talked about, especially the signs and symbols. You can't take some symbols literal and other ones figurative. You have to keep it in the context of how it's written, the style that it's written. That's very important. And I will tell you, that's one of, I think, the biggest mistakes people make with apocalyptic literature. So it has a special style. Secondly, it has what? Has a time frame. We could even say it has a specific time frame. And in Revelation 1 and in 22, what does it say? Soon, near, at hand. That idea there that these things are going to happen within a short period of time. Let's put it that way. Also has a specific audience. And who is the audience? 7 churches of Asia. And we could debate, as we've had, whether or not these churches are figurative or literal, but we do know this, that they are in the setting contextually, whether they're figurative or literal, of a certain time period and in a certain geographic region. And along those lines, it has a special style, specific time frame, specific audience, and finally a what? It has a special background. And what is that background? Well, we're going to get into that even more so today when we get into this idea of the book in chapter 5. What do we know about at the beginning of chapter 5? There is this book, or your translation may say scroll. What do we know about this scroll or book at the beginning of chapter 5? Make sure you raise your hands. We'll get a mic to you so the people at home that are watching can hear. What's Charlie's over here? If we get a mic to Charlie.
First, I would like to offer this. Acronyms help me a lot. STAB will help everybody here remember what those 4 are.
Okay.
Just keep STAB in your mind.
Just keep
and you've
stabbing
got-
away and we'll get it.
Yeah, you got
Yeah.
it. The scrolls are written front and back, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Okay. So it's written front and back. What else? It's sealed. Okay. It is sealed. What else? I hear a lot of mumbling, but no definitive answers. Written front and back. It is sealed. How many seals are on it? 7 seals. And what else? Is the scroll or book, is it open or closed when we are introduced to it? Closed. Why? Or sealed. Why? Okay, Curtis back there.
They're looking for somebody worthy to open it.
Okay, not just anybody could open it. So, and the key word there is somebody worthy to open it.
I did some research on that.
Uh-oh.
Had not ever been interested in it, but it seems that the reason there were 7 seals is one was for the heir. This is when somebody is writing a will. There is one for the heir, one for the executor, and 5 witnesses. And when they get ready to open this will, the executor will say, "Who is here?" And you can say, because they wanted everybody there, but we had 4 witnesses here. And so, as they did that, they they melted the wax and put their seal into it so that each one of the seals would have been different, with a different seal on it if it were written as a will.
Okay.
So thought that was interesting.
It is interesting. I don't know if I would necessarily interpret it as a will, but it's interesting. Thank you for that. Anything else? What about this worthiness? Who's worthy to open it? There's somebody they find is worthy. The lamb that was slain is worthy. And why is he worthy? Because ultimately, because it was Jesus and he is sinless, perfect, and was a sacrifice, which makes him worthy. Okay, and they would have understood all of that, especially since Jesus is referenced in chapter 5 as a lion and a slain lamb. What does the lion refer to? Yeah, the Lion of Judah, all the way back, is it Genesis 49, I think it is, where those blessings are given out? The Lion of Judah, the scepter shall not depart from your hand. And so they would see the lion imagery, they would connect it back to that, but they would also see the lamb imagery, connect that to Jesus and the cross and all of the connections there. They would have understood that and why he is worthy to open that. So, Jane shared the research about sealing, and part of what she said too is that it's a wax seal, right? And the way sealing worked is that you would heat up this wax and then you would put an insignia of some kind, or in this case, we'll see in a moment, maybe even the numbers could be one interpretation of this. And that would form a seal. By the way, just kind of side note, that's the same way the tomb of Jesus was sealed, essentially, is that there was a cord hanging across the stone and a big wax blob held that cord in, and the insignia of Caesar went into the wax, which was a huge sign to say, don't mess with this. Okay? And that carried authority. Anything more about the book that is important with it being like a scroll? Part of that's already been said, but is there anything important about that? It's not a trick question. Just see if you found anything. One of the things that sticks out is that it is written front and back. And that's not traditionally how scrolls were used. And so that is interesting that this proclamation covers both sides of the scroll rather than just one-sided. And so that's something that's interesting that sticks out there. Now, what is this book about? That's the question. What is all of it about? Because believe it or not, we're going to try to cover all of this today. So we're moving a little faster pace maybe than normal. But what is it about? What are these seals about? Get a mic to Dave up here, Joe.
To Jane's point, if they would have viewed this as symbolic of a will, then this would be God's will, and it would have also carried back to the beginning. Well, not beginning, because before everyone else was created, and so the Lamb, the Son of God, would have served as the heir, the executor, and the 5 witnesses, and that's why he was qualified to open it up.
Okay. What's contained in the seal? What is it? And we're going to dive deeper, but hopefully you read through this and you saw of it. What is it? What does it represent? What? God's what? God's plan? Okay. Let me ask you about that. If this is God's plan, did God's plan always include that there would have to be martyrs involved? Because that's part of these seals. And that's where this is important to kind of understand, I think, what's going on here. I don't see this so much as God's plan as it is an account of what has happened. And included in that are things that were not God's will necessarily, but are what happened because of man and what man does in this uncovering of all the seals. And I could tell you that the first seal, I think, obviously is God's plan. And the second seal is more of God's plan. But when you start getting beyond that, what you start seeing is not so much God's will from the beginning about all the things he wanted to happen, but it is a sense God's will in the fact that these are the things that did happen and how God carries it out to still carry out his will. And those are, while they're not radically different, they are somewhat distinct from one another. I don't believe that God's plan from the beginning was that people had to be martyrs for him. But the reaction of mankind, starting with the sin in the garden forward, set in motion things that were going to create that. And so that's an important part. The other thing is that really and truthfully, this really is a historical kind of, and then looking forward account, essentially from Calvary forward. And now the history of Israel plays a role in this first seal, but what we really see there is kind of the arrival of Jesus and what that created and what occurs because of that. And so that's, I think, one of the important things. I typically view this scroll as more of a historical kind of document of here's what happened and some future history in there as well, because it is God that's delivering that. And so that kind of gives you at least my perspective, and I could be completely wrong about that. We're dealing in literature that from its very definition is difficult to understand. We start off with that understanding that there is a lot of symbolic stuff and it is somewhat difficult, and that is made more difficult, by the way, by the literally hundreds of interpretations of all of these things. and how they can be taken. So one of the things that, again, we're trying to do is trying to kind of back up and just kind of see this at a high level for what it seems to be, and we're not going to get out our microscopes, in other words, and try to look at all the details here, which is the challenge, because we're tempted to do that. And I understand that completely. So let's dive into these seals, and I know we won't get all the way done. By the way, here's one representation of what this could have looked like, and see how the seals are actually binding cords that wrap around the scroll. Now, where this is just a representation, obviously, is if you look at that, you couldn't just open one seal and read just portion of that and then open the second. And so that's where this falls apart, right? Because you got to remember this is a vision, and it's almost as if he is opening and only can open so far, and then there's another seal, and it's like there's seals within the scroll. It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about that. And that's, again, where this is a vision that is beyond our comprehension sometimes. So, seal number one. When he opens the first seal, what happens? And this is, we're in chapter 6 now, if you're not there. Chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Okay, I've got thunder. All right, the thunder is the voice of the four living creatures who say, come. And they're going to say that. Why are they saying come? What's the purpose of that? Gather around. One of the things it reminds me of is Elijah on Mount Carmel, where he tells them when he gets ready to do his sacrifice, come and see. Get closer. Make sure you don't miss this, okay? And they're going to say that repeatedly. So they say that with thunder. The seal is broken. And what do you see when the seal is broken? A rider. What else? A white horse. What else? Okay, he has a crown. He is conquering. And he has a bow. Okay? So we have this white horse. What does a white horse symbolize, by the way, typically? Good, power, by the way, purity. But white horses usually, when you see pictures of generals on white horses, that's on purpose, because it's power, it's authority, it's good. And so that's depicted. Our mind goes there. So what is this symbolizing? What is this supposed to mean? You got a white horse, a rider with a crown and a bow, and he's conquering. Going out to conquer and conquering. So he's effective in what he does. What is the first seal representing? Who do you think the rider is? Jesus. Okay. Why do you think it's Jesus? Because he's worthy of a crown? I would agree, except I'd also point out that the sea beast and the dragon also seem to be worthy of a crown, and they're not good guys necessarily. In fact, they've got lots of crowns, don't they? So, what else? It's not just the crown, although it plays a part. What else? He's conquering. He's on a white horse. He's on a good horse, a white horse. He's conquering. He's got a crown. What is this symbolizing if this is Jesus? What is he doing? Winning. How did he win? Conquered death. Okay. Yeah, I think, and death is all part of that. All that goes together, but this first seal of him going out with the bow and conquering and to conquer is not just Jesus arriving on earth, or not just him even being the sacrifice, but it is Jesus going out and conquering the world through the gospel. And more than likely, this is the early success of the gospel. Remember that even the Jews looked at what the apostles were able to do and talked about how the apostles had turned the world upside down with this news about Jesus. So was the gospel successful? in that sense. Okay? Yes. Let's keep reading. The second seal. What happens in the second seal? That's in chapter 6, starting in verse 3. Verse 3 is the same thing, but verse 4. Now we have what? We have another horse, right? How many horses are there going to be, by the way? 4. Okay? We have another horse, and this horse is red. And its rider is doing what? He is removing peace from the earth so that people would slay one another. That doesn't sound good, does it? And what does he have? He has a sword. Okay? What is this representing? Persecution, bloodshed, war. Okay? What was that? Sin. Okay? If the first horse is the success of the gospel, the second horse would seem to be pointing to the problems and reactions to the spread of the gospel and the conflict that came from the spread of the gospel. And there's even this thought that, you could even think of it this way, that by the time we get to the mid-90s here with this letter, they've already gone through the persecution of Nero that everyone, if you don't take Domitian as the focal point, it's Nero in the 60s. And so they've already gone through that, and now they're in another point where there's more persecution, greater persecution. But the gospel, as it goes out, it causes turmoil. And it causes turmoil for these people receiving the letter. Right? And so you see that this rider represents this conflict on this red horse. The red is kind of interesting because red, by the way, I don't know if you realize it, but red's kind of an offensive color. That's not a dig at Alabama. That's just a reality. That when you see red, it's alarming, right? That's why fire trucks are red, because it gets your attention. That's why really red sports cars get pulled over more. It's not because the police are looking for them. It's because you can't fit in as well with a red sports car, Malachi. So the reality is, right, you want to get away with a sports car, get a black one. Don't get red unless you want attention. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what you see. Red's alarming. So then we come to the third seal. What's the third seal? We skip on down now. Verse 5 is the same thing as before until it says there's another horse. What color is this horse? Black. And what does the rider have on this horse? Scales. And what is he saying? What is he talking about? Let's get a mic to Curtis there.
The way I read it, it says the voice came from the 4 living creatures, and it says...
That's the come. So that's the same in every seal. Now, what does the writer say after that? Keep reading.
A quart of wheat for a day's wages and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil or the wine.
Yeah. What does that mean? What? Famine? Economy? Spiritual famine? Okay. Do you remember when we talked about the earth beast and how the earth beast would give the mark of the beast to people, which would signify their ability to trade? One of the things that happened economically for Christians during this time was economic hardship. And we see this historically, that they, because of their faith, were not allowed to trade openly and freely like those who bowed down to the emperor and worshiped him as a god. They were penalized for that. Turn over to chapter 13 and look at verses 6 and 7. Or 16 and 17, excuse me. So this is the text of the earth beast we looked at Wednesday night. It causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number its name. And so what we see here is, and you got to put this kind of, and see how this builds. The gospel comes with seal 1, and it's successful. Seal 2, it starts causing trouble. And it starts causing trouble for Rome. Seal 3, the Roman Empire starts penalizing people who follow the gospel specifically by not allowing them to eat. By making it virtually impossible for them to buy wheat or barley. And the do not damage the oil of the wine means they're not even marking those prices up. They're just not selling you oil and wine. All you're getting essentially is grain at exorbitant prices, black market prices, if you will. Because if anybody was going to sell to them, they were breaking the law. And so that was part of their persecution. And you might even say it was kind of the first level of persecution. Because then we get to, does everybody see how that, and how do the scales fit into that, by the way? That's how they traded. Do you remember the Old Testament? How many times they would talk about how they would weight the scales in order to take advantage of the poor and the fatherless and the widows, that they would do so purposely, weighing down, charging more than they should. That's the picture here. Weighting the scales, overcharging those who follow the gospel. So then we come to verse 7, and we come to seal number 4. And what do we have in seal 4? We have the 4 creatures again saying, come, and then what do we have? We have a 4th horse, don't we? The pale rider, as some people call it. Although it's really a pale horse, and I don't know if the rider's pale or not, but the horse is pale. And who's riding the horse? Death. And Hades follows after him. Now, what is the picture here? Famine. There's famine. What else? Besides famine. There's famine, there's wild beasts, there's pestilence. Joe?
Yeah, it's the next level of persecution.
Right. Yeah. And you got to understand, so for instance, famine, was it a famine all over the Roman Empire? No, the Christians who would die of a famine did so. Why? Because they couldn't buy food to survive and eat. Because of the 3rd seal. See how the seals keep building on one another. Yep.
Did they lay siege during this time to Jerusalem?
No, because again, if we're in mid-90s, Jerusalem has been destroyed essentially. Temple's not there. This is more about anybody who held to the faith was persecuted. And that was not just in Jerusalem, but everywhere. And that's where the differentiation of the dates makes a difference in how you interpret this. So does that make sense at all? What about wild beasts? We've all seen in the movies, right, where Christians were thrown into arenas and lions and tigers were released to kill them. What this is talking about, this 4th rider, is, as Joe said, this next level of persecution, which is death. People were dying because of their faith. Now, go back to what we said at the beginning. Was that God's will that people died for their faith? Not really, but that's what happened. Why? Because of the wickedness of the Roman Empire. That's why. And because of how they treated the gospel. Because of all the way, so what you see again is gospel comes, success, gospel tears the world apart, and those in power in Rome react with this persecution. Seals 3 and 4 are the persecution that they have encountered. Any questions about those first 4 seals? Get a mic to John.
My version reads that it was the first creature that read the first seal, which looked like a lion.
Okay.
And the second creature read the second seal, or said, "Come and see." And that creature was the one that looked like the calf. And the third creature that said, "Come and see," was the...
Yeah.
Is there anything to connect there with
If
the
they're just
man and the
seraphim,
economy?
Yeah, no.
No.
If they're just seraphim, it's just, and remember they're seraphim that also reflect on the creation of the world. If we go back to that scene, it's just a world retelling the history if you want to take it to any depth, but really no significance. Yeah.
Well, it's in here.
Yeah.
It means something.
Well, let me say this. I love to watch a good movie, but not every detail means something. And you got to remember, this is a picture being painted, a story being told. Not everything has to mean something. And that's the challenge, is we can go too far in a lot of this stuff. And I don't mind going that far once we've gotten can I get a mic to Charlie? Once we've gotten the high level thing down. My problem in the way that we traditionally go into Revelation is we're more worried about what every detail says than seeing the overall picture about, and that's what we're doing today. Here's all this fits together. Here's what all of this looks like. And once we get that down, if you want to dive in on your own about, well, this is what each one of those little details means, you can do that. We're not going to do that in here. One of the reasons for that, by the way, is if we do that, we're going to have 20 different opinions about what all that means. That's just how it is. Whereas when we don't do that, we can come to an agreement. This is what the story means. This is the overall point of this vision. And that's what we're trying to do. Charlie?
It may be a stretch, but I was just sitting here looking at this and saying, you could describe our earth right this very minute.
Sure.
For those first 4 seals. And it's obvious to me that they recognized it back then, like you're talking about the audience.
Yeah.
And, there's all sorts of things that fall into place here, like red and black, and we wear black for mourning. But I'm just saying, this is pretty much the way we react to the world today, but we just don't use these same symbols.
Yeah, no doubt that the story of Revelation can layer and layer and layer and tell more and more and more. There's no doubt about that. The story of persecution of mankind is a repeated story with different details. That's the challenge of this book. When you take it out of the context, I could go through and replace all these seals with something right now, right? You could talk about economic hardship and how you're not allowed to eat at certain places unless you have a vaccine or a mask on if you wanted to, or if you want to get all caught up in that. And you could talk about what's going on in Afghanistan and people dying, being martyrs for their faith. I mean, you could interpret these things. And you can go back through history and you can go, if you really want to interpret it and see an easy pattern, go to World War II and look at Nazi Germany. All these things fall into line there, don't they? Every one of them. But that's not why this book was written. This book wasn't written to talk about what happened in World War II. That gives these people no hope. To go back to our first 4 essentials. If what's going to happen in this book doesn't happen until the mid-1900s, that doesn't have an impact not only on those people, but the Roman Empire and any of their background. But here's what we can do. We can take the overall message, to get back to that high view, we can take the overall message of this book, and when we are frustrated, and when we are angry, and when we see things like this, we can see the same overall message to us they got, which is God always wins, be on the right side, don't give up your faith, don't lose your hope, continue to fight with God. That's the overall message, Joe.
And the reason, like you said, the reason it fits so many different eras of history is that's the pathway, or that's the natural progression of persecution. That first you're economically deprived, and in that process, those who are depriving you, they dehumanize those who are being deprived. And
Right.
as you dehumanize somebody, then you take it to the next level and the next level. And ultimately, we know from history that they made a sport out of persecution in the theater with the wild animals. So it's
Right.
just it's continual downward spiral.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And again, you can put that spiral into a lot of context. A lot of context.
When we talked about those 4 creatures 2 or 3 weeks ago, we spent a little time on them. And we talked about them being dominant creatures. I believe, like the lion was dominant in the wild animal kingdom, and the calf or the bull in the domestic kingdom. And I had really never heard of that picture or interpretation. I'm not really sure where it came from, but I don't really glean that from those 4 creatures. But we had these connection points here to those 4 creatures. And like the first creature, it was the only one that had a voice that sounded like thunder. And when I think of an eagle, a calf, a man, or a lion, that lion connecting to that thunder voice, it works. I mean, it makes sense. And so to me they're connected in some way. I don't know what they are.
Yeah, so...
But I think it's just worthy to share that in fact, the red fiery horse sounds like a pretty bad guy. Well, the dragon was red fiery, so there's that connection color there, too. The white horse, spreading of the gospel. Well, who's the rider of the white horse? Jesus.
Yeah.
And so there's those connections that I don't feel like
where that gets
there.
difficult is, again, it's the rider of the red horse, we don't have a specific guy to put on there. Like, it's not as easy. It's not necessarily Satan. It's not necessarily a certain man. I mean, it could point to Nero. It could point to Domitian. It could point to the Pharisees. It could point to a lot of people. And so it's overall not trying to figure out who that man is. It's just seeing that this is the persecution and reaction to the gospel. And that's what we're trying to get. As to the 4 horses, the 4 creatures, what we said then, when we noticed all that, was they were representative of all of God's creation. That they were 3 different parts of creation, and then mankind who rules over all 3 parts. And the whole point was they're representative, and in that scene, to go back, to recall, is we had the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles representing the collection of all of God's people, and we had all of creation praising God. And so it was the created world praising God, and then it was all of God's people praising God in response. If we want to make a significant kind of reaction or connection to these first 4 seals and those things, then what that means is that it is the created world that is declaring these scroll openings. Because that's what they represent in the first scene. And so that's where, again, I don't think that there's something to be said, hey, this was the beast of the air that talked about the red rider.
I'm not trying to find out who these riders are. That's not where I'm going. I'm just feeling that the second seal rider is very well connected to the fiery red dragon. And the conflict on earth is connected to Satan behind it.
There's no doubt Satan is connected to the conflict.
I'm connecting the white horse rider to Jesus Christ.
Right.
And the conquering that he did, spreading the gospel, and even the believers after him to that white horse.
And we've made all those connections too. I think the reaction, obviously, Satan's involved in the second horse. Okay, I appreciate you sharing. That's just to get through. We're getting through. It's a depth I don't plan on going to on some of those details as the teacher, but appreciate you bringing them up. So let's get to the 5th seal because I got to get 2 more in 5 minutes, at least. 5th seal is what? Souls under the altar, what are those? Martyrs. And what are they saying? How long? What is the purpose? What are they asking for? Avenge? What else? What's another word maybe? Revenge? What's maybe a better word? Judgment or justice. These are dead, faithful martyrs who died, and they are waiting for justice for their death. Why did they die? First 4 seals. Well, because of the Word of God, but ultimately because of all of the first 4 seals, right? Because the gospel comes, the world is in turmoil, because then there is this economic hardship. Some of them die from that. And there is also that some of them are fed to wild beasts or just persecuted, killed. And that was what makes them martyrs. And as a result of that, here they are in heaven saying, how long, O Lord? How long? Essentially, what is God's answer? A little while longer. How satisfactory is that if you're one of the martyrs under the altar? Right? Little while longer. Wait a little while longer. God's going to let this go on longer. Is that hard for you to handle? Yeah. And that is in direct conflict with our picture of God, is it not? It's in direct conflict with our picture of God. So let's get quickly to the 6th seal. What happens with the 6th seal? Wrath, destruction, earthquake, the sun becomes black, fig tree sheds its winter fruit. What is this symbolizing? Judgment. And we're not going to get to the 7th seal in chapter 8, but when you look at these first 6 seals, just look at the way they stack up. We've got the gospel coming, we've got the gospel causing conflict, we got the response to that conflict being persecution economically, and then persecution physically, essentially, through death. Martyrdom in the 5th seal. How long? A little while longer. But then in verse 6, what does he say? Justice is coming. And that's why this book is so important, or this scroll, to understand. He is telling us and the people here how they got to this point in history, which is the 5th seal. And he is saying it's going to go on a little while longer, but justice is coming. I am going to avenge you. I am going to judge Rome. I am going to judge anyone who has persecuted you. And those images with the 6th seal, you see used in Old Testament prophecies of judgment. And where that's going to get even more kind of intense is when we get to the bowls. There's this direct reference back to Ezekiel and pouring out the bowls of God's wrath. What this is all setting up is the trumpets and the bowls, which are going to talk about God's judgment. But this scroll is telling the historical story in pictures of how we got here. And this is where, now think about this, this is where if you're in one of those 7 churches, you get this scroll. That opening of the 5th seal and the 6th seal is where you are standing waiting for the 6th seal to occur. That's your focus. Because you've lost people, you've had people that you're related to under that altar in the 5th seal. You can't buy wheat and barley for a normal rate. You can't get oil or wine. You are currently suffering all of those things of the first 5 seals. You yourself, while you're not a martyr, are thinking, how long, O Lord? How long will this keep on going? And so you are waiting, and that's where the sixth seal is somewhat prophetic. It's coming. Hasn't happened yet. And what you get to with the trumpets and the bowls is more what that's going to look like. We're over time. So we'll cut off. We'll try to talk a little bit about the seventh seal on Wednesday night, and then we'll pick up from there. Thank you.